Hello and welcome to the Time on Screen podcast. My name is Zach Kazan. I'm an editor at Worn and Wound, and this is a Worn and Wound podcast that examines the intersection between movies, time, and watches. We talk about movies on this podcast mostly, and there's a little bit of watch talk sometimes. I'm lucky to be joined today by Kat Shoulders, Worn and Wound's media production manager. How's it going, Kat?
It's going great. Thank you for having me on this episode. I'm super excited.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk about this movie with you. You actually suggested this movie. We're going to be talking about Contact, Robert Zemeckis' 1997 science fiction film starring Jodie Foster and Matthew McConaughey. This is one of my favorite movies. I love this movie. I'm really excited to kind of like dive into it with you. Before we get too far down into that rabbit hole, I just want to do a quick wrist check since this is a watch podcast. What are you what are you wearing today?
Got to make the masses happy. I'm wearing my Seiko Captain Willard. I don't even remember the reference number, guys. Don't kill me on this. It's the green edition. I guess it was sort of like a re-edition they did maybe during COVID, I think, right? 2020,
I think that
2021.
Was like late 2020, I think.
And they did a green and then they did a black that was like very true to the original. And then this is the green one, and I love this watch so much.
Yeah, that's a good
What about you? What are you wearing?
I'm also wearing a green watch today. I'm wearing my Grand Seiko SPGH 271, the summer dial.
I always forget that you have that one. That one's so cool. I love it.
Yeah, I love it. I've been wearing it for the last like 3 or 4 days. Just kind of.
Yeah.
It had been a while, so I thought I'd break it out.
That's the green with the gold.
Yes. Yep. Gold
accents on
hands
the
and our Yep.
You know,
Great
that one, I always felt like that was like the least popular of the like 4, season models that they came out with. I felt like that one just never got enough love, and that was one of my favorites. I really liked that one.
Yeah, it was. I was drawn to it immediately. Like I went to the authorized dealer in my area who sells Grand Seiko, and I knew I wanted to pick out one of the new at the time new seasons watches, and I kind of like looked at all of them. I had a chance to see them all, and the green one just like stood out to me immediately. And this is before like any of the the spring watch with the cherry blossom pattern, the pink dial kind of became like a cult hit, and this was like well before the kind of hype emerged around that. And I just love the green and gold. Like to me is like just a really great combination.
It is, and it's actually like one of my favorites. I loved when Tudor came out with the Black Bay, gold 58. I guess it's a 58. Yeah, I just love that color combo. I love the green and gold. There was another watch. I think the Harrods Tudor as well had sort of the same kind of color green that I've got on this Seiko. And add gold accents, or the gilt accents, I guess they call it. But
yeah, no, it's a classic combination. There's obviously there's Rolex, Rolex day dates that have green and gold accents, and the Rolex Wimbledon date just is kind of a famous example with similar.
That's a great one too.
Yeah, no, it's great. It's as kind of classic and old school as it gets in a lot of ways, I think.
Awesome, cool.
All right, so we've done a little bit of watch talk. Let's get into Contact. So just a real quick overview. First of all, we're gonna like definitely spoil this movie for anyone who hasn't seen it. It's it's like 25 years old, so I don't feel too bad about spoiling a movie that's old and has been kind of like part of the culture for so long. But just a fair warning: if you want to be surprised by the ending of Contact, then maybe. Don't listen to this podcast quite yet. Maybe check it out, check out the movie, and then come back to it. So Contact, as I mentioned, was released in the summer of 1997. It's directed by Robert Zemeckis. This was the follow-up to Forrest Gump, which he directed in 1994 and was like a cultural phenomenon. It won Best Picture, Best Director, Tom Hanks. Obviously a huge moment for him. Are you a Forrest Gump fan, Kat?
I mean, I don't know anyone that isn't a Forrest Gump fan.
I'm not a huge Forrest Gump fan.
Really?
Yeah,
I do love. I love it. Yeah, I'm a fan, and I'm a huge Robert Zemeckis fan. I love most of his movies. The ones he's done in the last few years have not been exceptional, but I think
Yeah.
during the 90s, and early 2000s, he really hit his stride. And I love him, and I love Alan Silvestri, who also kind of works with him quite a bit on the scores.
Yep.
And this movie has a great score to it as well.
Yeah. Zemeckis is an interesting figure. He's kind of like a contemporary of like Steven Spielberg and George Lucas, and kind of like came up with them. And I feel like if Spielberg weren't in the picture somehow, and Zemeckis was able to have, his career kind of independently of him, then like he would kind of be the guy. Like he would be like his generation's like big, like mainstream, broad, like blockbuster filmmaker. He directed the Back to the Future movies, Forrest Gump, obviously a big Oscar movie. He's worked in all sorts of different genres. I think what you're alluding to, that stuff that's like less successful for a lot of people, is the motion capture stuff, which is like really kind of, kind of played with heavily over the last, like 10, 15 years or so. And that is, they're family movies. Like he's really kind of like going after like a family audience, and some of them are, more successful than others, but it's just kind of it's a weird kind of like left turn in his career.
Yeah, that's a good point. I kind of, he's a strange director, because I'm looking at, the list of the movies that he's directed, and while they're all, there's action, and then there's some that are definitely more, I guess made for children, but they all have this childlike aspect to them. I don't know what it is about it, and I'm kind of searching for the right word to describe it. But when you think of Back to the Future, Romancing the Stone, and Death Becomes Her, and all these great movies, and to Forrest Gump, and Contact, and even this movie has somewhat of this, like, I don't know, childhood. Dream-like, I don't know, fantasy. There's just like this something about these movies that he kind of taps into,
kind of like awe and wonder about kind of like the world that he's
great.
playing.
Fantastic. That's kind of what I was trying to describe. And he's made some great movies, and like I said, just up until the last few years, I haven't been a huge fan of quite a few of them. But I'm looking at his list here, and there's a lot of favorites on here, and I feel like not that he's an underrated director, but I think for people that especially are maybe not be in kind of the film or the movie world, people think of Steven Spielberg, like you said, and some of these others, and he kind of gets forgotten, even though when you start to look through his list of movies, you're like, oh my gosh, yeah, he's an amazing director, and he's done a lot of great stuff.
Yeah, no, he's definitely made some very big kind of like well-loved box office hits, and he's also like made some real flops. Like I mean, he directed a movie I like quite a bit, but is like almost universally derided. This movie Allied. I don't know if you've seen that. With
was that the Brad Pitt?
Yeah, Brad Pitt, and it critically very unsuccessful.
And I remember it did not do well.
Yeah, and but it's kind of kind of an interesting period movie. It takes place, during the World War II, and it's a spy movie, and it's and Flight with Denzel Washington, I think, is also a really interesting movie. Like his movies are always interesting, and I think worth seeing, even when they don't kind of like capture the zeitgeist, like Forrest Gump and Back to the Future, and like to a certain extent Contact. So Contact is really one of my favorite types of movies. It's a very smart, thoughtful science fiction movie that takes science seriously. There's different kinds of science fiction movies, obviously, and like the type that that asks like really big questions about the way that we live has always kind of been my favorite. This movie was compared, by some critics to 2001: A Space Odyssey when it came out. It's kind of it's dissimilar from 2001 in almost every way. It's not, it's a very different viewing experience. But the way that it kind of like poses questions about like the nature of like humanity and the universe, I think is similar, and that's like. There's no type of movie that I like more than that, I think.
Same. I love being questioned.
Yeah.
I love my reality being questioned.
Same here. And I think science fiction is a really great genre for that to be for those kinds of questions to be explored.
Absolutely.
So just like a real quick plot summary, the movie stars Jodie Foster as an astronomer, physicist, scientist named Eleanor Arroway, who specializes in the search for alien intelligence. And Matthew McConaughey, second build in this movie, he plays I guess I'd call him like a religious scholar or writer who crosses paths with Eleanor early in both of their careers, and like their paths will cross again and again as the movie progresses. Basically, what happens is just as Ellie's SETI project, Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence project, is about to lose funding, her team receives a signal from a distant star system that appears to be a sign of alien intelligence. And what the movie is really about is how the world kind of like grapples with this news, how governments deal with it, how the science community deals with it, how the religious community deals with it. And it kind of becomes a movie about like the push and pull between like faith, religion, and science, which is, I think, a really... this is like a summer blockbuster movie. This movie was released on the 4th of July weekend, I think, in 1997, and
oh wow,
like that's a pretty like heady stuff for like a big summer blockbuster. Like it's not what you would expect to see in movie theaters in 2022. It's definitely pretty far removed from a like a big comic book action movie.
Yeah, that's true.
So yeah, it really does ask big questions, and it's very exciting and has a lot of like kind of like big set piece scenes where Zemeckis can kind of show off his command of the special effects and so forth.
Yeah.
When did you first come across this movie, Kat? Did you see it in theaters in '97, or did you come to it a little later?
No, I was 6 at the time. I didn't watch this in theaters, and I honestly I can't pinpoint the exact age that I watched this, but I do remember being young at home watching this movie. So I'm sure it was something that we rented from Blockbuster a time or two. But what stood out to me as a kid watching this movie was I've always gravitated towards these like father-daughter movies and moments, and this has got a really sweet story. In this movie, her father dies when she is maybe 8 or 9 years old. And, and we'll talk about it later, but she is kind of sort of reunited with a version of him later on. But so that always was something that I just gravitated towards as a kid, and not really, and I thought it was cool, like all the science and everything. And I don't think I paid attention to what was actually happening in the movie, other than I thought it was just a sci-fi movie as a kid. And then as I've gotten older and watched it, kind of coming to terms with, oh, this is like something that people actually do. This is a real job. People listen for anything that is out there in the universe, and that is incredibly cool in itself. And this movie just it speaks to me on a lot of different levels. And now, kind of watching it and thinking, wow, I kind of identify with her character, not in what she does, but her stubbornness and her work ethic, and some of the things that I found that were common in myself. And I absolutely love this movie.
Yeah.
What about you?
So I did see this movie in theaters. I was a little older than you. I saw this movie in the theater with my dad in 1997. He took me to see it. He had some interest in it, I think because of Carl Sagan's involvement. That's a name we haven't mentioned yet. But
is your dad a fan?
Yeah. So I remember my dad showing me Carl Sagan's Cosmos documentary when I was quite young. I have a memory of seeing that. And so this was kind of on my dad's radar, and I think my dad was a Forrest Gump fan too. And so like we we're both kind of like, I was young. I was like probably like 13 at the time, and science fiction was I was a nerd and like important to me. So I remember this is a movie that my dad took me to see, and we both really enjoyed it. But I think it's important to kind of talk about Carl Sagan in all this, because this is really it's based on his novel. It's the only novel that he ever wrote, which came out in 1995. But he actually conceived of this movie even earlier than that, and started developing it in the late 70s, early 80s with Anne Druyan, who he would eventually marry, and is also, I believe, listed as a producer on this movie. She certainly consulted on it and had a role in it.
That's cool.
So Carl Sagan is a very interesting figure. I think if listeners aren't familiar with him, because he passed away actually shortly before this movie was released. Before it was finished, actually, I think he unfortunately passed away. He died quite young. But if listeners are familiar with Neil deGrasse Tyson, kind of a public intellectual figure, the science figure, Carl Sagan was very much a version of that. For an earlier generation, he made science approachable and really like tapped into like the wonder of like the universe and like the big questions of life in a really engaging way. He was quite a popular figure. He was on late night talk shows. We can put in the show notes, but there's all sorts of like great interviews with him on the Tonight Show and other television programs. And this movie is really kind of like filled with his ideas about about science and about the universe. And according to Andrewian, I found a really great quote about how they conceived this movie. She said, "Carl's and my dream was to write something that would be a fictional representation of what contact would actually be like, that would convey something of the true grandeur of the universe."
Yeah.
And that is really like when I think of Carl Sagan, like he was always kind of talking about the grandeur of the universe. And I think this movie really like taps into that idea in a pretty significant way.
Yeah, what I loved about Sagan too is that, um, I don't maybe he was polarizing in the sense that he was, a scientist and everything, but, I think what you see so much today is this polarizing effect. You're either, like, very much this way or you're very much this way, and and he, was quoted several times as saying, that the creator or God of this universe or whatever is difficult to prove or disprove, and he was really like, "You we don't know," I like I'm a middle of the road person,
Hmm.
and it seemed to me that he was, obviously he was leaning more towards the scientific side of things, but I think there was this middle of the road aspect for him, and you really can't say we don't know, and that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to find answers, and I think he for a group of people that is religious, and we'll talk about that for the movie too, is that he would be someone that they could easily have a conversation with, a scientist that they could talk with about these things that so many people are conflicted with science and religion.
Yep. I think that Carl Sagan, when you first encounter this movie, you kind of think of like Ellie Arroway as like the Carl Sagan figure because they're
Yeah.
both scientists. But like the more I've seen this movie, the more I realize that um, really like the Ellie character and the Palmer Joss character that Matthew McConaughey plays are really kind of like they're both Carl Sagan in a
Yeah.
lot of ways because
Yeah.
the Palmer Joss character is he's a religious scholar and a religious writer, but he's always talking about the search for truth and being
Mhm.
open-minded and being curious about the world around him, which is the same thing that Ellie talks about, just from a different perspective. And I think that to your point, Carl Sagan was always like very like fair-minded about these things, and really wanted to have like a public discussion about science and the implications of these large ideas. And that's unfortunately something that's kind of like we've lost a little bit
Yeah.
of, I think, in the time between Contact and now. And maybe Contact kind of like, even in a way, like kind of like sees the future on that, I think a little bit, like it kind of predicts that a little bit. But it's unfortunate that, um, I don't know. We don't really have. It's unfortunate that Carl Sagan passed away so young. And he's no
Yeah.
longer with us. But we
Definitely.
certainly lost something. Along the way. I can't help but think about that when I watch this
Mhm.
movie over and over again.
Yeah, it'd be interesting, to hear his take today if he were still alive, based on just kind of how maybe our country in particular has gone with in both directions, in science and religion.
Yep.
Really,
Yep.
yeah,
For sure. Um, so as I mentioned, they Carl Sagan and Andrian had come up with the idea of this movie in the early '80s, and this is one of those films that was kind of in what you might call like development hell for a very long time.
Wow.
Went through several different scripts, and different writers were involved in it. That's why Sagan eventually wrote the novel. He wrote it to kind of like spur the process along. The novel came out in 1985, and he was thinking that it would be kind of like, easier to adapt and get made into a movie if it was a successful novel.
Yeah.
To a certain extent, he was right.
George
Miller.
Read the novel?
I haven't read the novel.
Yeah,
I've read the Wikipedia page for the novel many times over the years, so I'm kind
that
of
counts, right?
like vaguely familiar. It doesn't count. It certainly doesn't
the
count.
Cliff Notes version.
Yeah, I'm kind of vaguely familiar with how like the movie and the novel differ in certain key ways, which is kind of an interesting thing to look into if you're like a super fan of the movie. I should read the novel. Like it's
Same.
it's been out there for years, and I've just never read it. Carl Sagan's a wonderful writer and very approachable, and certainly like The Demon Haunted World is a great book. Blake Bettner is a fan of that book, and Blake Bettner's a fan of this movie. I should point out as well. He wanted to be on the podcast, and we just couldn't get the scheduling to work out quite right. But Carl Sagan has a number of fans on the Worn and Wound team, I would say, and we highly recommend that folks check him out if there's some common interest there. Zemeckis actually turned down the opportunity to direct this movie in the early 90s because he didn't like the ending that existed at the time in the current script, which apparently involved aliens appearing in the sky and like putting on a light show, and Zemeckis just like wasn't. He thought it wasn't
down with that, right?
Yeah, wasn't interested in doing that. So George Miller, who is the kind of famously the director of the Mad Max movies as well as many other films, was hired to direct the movie, and he was the person who cast Jodie Foster in the role of Eleanor Arroway, and he cast Ray Fiennes as Palmer Joss, which I think is an interesting choice. Would be very different with him, and that movie never actually got, obviously, it never advanced to production. It was in pre-production for a long time. Warner Brothers fired George Miller, and they gave Zemeckis, in the wake of Forrest Gump and all the success that he had there, the final cut of the movie, which was kind of like a big get for Zemeckis at that stage of his career. So he decided to come on board once he had total artistic control, and that finally got the movie made. And it was his big follow-up to Forrest Gump, the big Oscar film.
Yeah, I was actually reading that. So Jodie Foster had dropped out at one point, maybe during that transitional period with George Miller, and she came back on once Zemeckis picked it back up, and they had rewritten the script a little bit at that point. And I think she was obviously a go for the new script. I was reading, and if you ever watch movies on Amazon Prime, I've just now started using this feature, but they have this X-ray feature.
Yeah,
it shows you all these facts while you're watching the movie, and it's actually pretty cool. But apparently, Uma Thurman and Gillian Anderson were in talks of playing the role of Ellie as well, which
interesting.
I could definitely see Uma Thurman especially taking on that role, but. Yeah, just interesting. I think of Ray Fiennes. I love him as an actor, but I don't think he would have had this likability that McConaughey has. Because you almost are like, you don't really want to like McConaughey's character in this movie. He's not disproving Ellie, but he's obviously all on the opposite side of the spectrum and kind of very set in his ways as well. They both are. But you still really like him. He's like a very sweet guy. He's very open-minded, like you said. And I don't see Ray Fiennes playing, at least I've never seen him play that sort of kind of character.
Yeah. It's also interesting to think about, I love these like casting what if questions, like the idea of Uma Thurman. The idea of Uma Thurman and Ray Fiennes playing opposite each other in this movie is really interesting, especially Uma Thurman at that point in her career. I guess she would have been coming off of Pulp Fiction at that time.
Maybe,
so
that's right.
Pretty young. And I mean, that's just fascinating. But Ray Fiennes obviously is, he's British. I believe he's, British. And McConaughey is like very much, like Texas,
the American actor.
Like very, like he's got like the Southern accent, like, all throughout this movie. Like he's kind of an interesting foil for for the Jodie Foster character, they become like they become like a couple, by the end of the movie. There's like a romance between them, even as they start out kind of like, on opposite ends of the spectrum. So, so yeah, those casting questions are really,
I always love it. Yeah.
really fascinating. So I wanted to, kind of go through some of the like key scenes of the movie, and I picked out a handful. Kind of like going chronologically, you had already kind of pointed out that you were drawn to this movie because of the those early scenes between young Ellie and her dad. Do you want to talk about why those scenes are meaningful, to you, or what kind of like jumps out to you about those early scenes in the movie?
Yeah, well, it's they describe at some point early in the movie. I don't remember exactly what scene, but her mother, she, I believe, died at birth, giving birth to Ellie, and so it's just her and her dad. And like I said, I was a daddy's girl growing up, and so I just relate to this relationship, and he kind of encourages her to look for things in the stars. And I think she's seen in the beginning looking through a telescope and all of that. But one of the scenes you pointed out as your favorite scene is, unfortunately, when her dad has what maybe is like a heart episode, or I actually don't know exactly what happened. He's obviously taking medication for it, but he collapses in sort of their kitchen, and she runs to go get his medicine out of the cabinet upstairs. And it's just this great slow motion kind of running scene. But what she's kind of coming at the camera, and then all of a sudden it's the mirror that she's opening up the mirror. It's really cool shot. I Googled how they filmed that, because I was like, how is this possible? And what they did is they used a blue screen, and they shot the shot as you would normally, and then they just CGI'd it, the mirror there. But it's a really cool scene. It's a very sad scene, but it's shot in an incredible way.
That
very
is
dramatic.
I've heard that scene described as like the best scene, or the best shot. That mirror shot is the best shot that Robert Zemeckis has ever made in a movie. It's just like, it's really this kind of like bravura, like filmmaking flex that he was able to pull that off using special effects, and it's so really seamless. Cool. And there are other shots in those early kind of like young Ellie dad scenes where like the camera like goes through walls and windows and things, and that's all special effects work too. And it's like, it's so seamless, you don't realize it's special effects until you start doing like research on it, and that's kind of like, I think, the mark of a good special effects movie is when like you don't even realize that what you're watching is done with at the time, late 90s, like this is like very high end, like CGI. Effects
Exactly.
Work. Yeah.
There's a lot of effects in this movie, and especially towards the end.
Yep.
But and I'll just quickly note that it's a young Jenna Malone playing Ellie in this movie, and she's super popular as a kid in a lot of '90s movies that I grew up watching. I kind of forgot that she played her until I rewatched it.
Yeah, no, she does a great. It's a great like kind of like child actor performance, and because like Jodie Foster is she's a big star, in the '90s. Obviously, this is post Silence of the Lambs, and she's been in like a lot of like hit movies, and is like a very well known person. So to cast a child actor to play a very famous actress is a very tricky thing, and like they get like the mannerisms just right, and there's like enough similarity in how they look to kind of make it believable, and
a lot of similarities between the two of them.
Yeah, I like those early scenes too. I think that that Zemeckis, like he's that parent-child relationship comes up as a theme in a lot of his movies, like Forrest Gump, of course. It's very important. It's like that's something that he kind of like returns to over and over again. And,
and I think he does a really good job. The scenes are actually like very short in nature. And her scenes with Matthew McConaughey are really short in nature, but he does a really good job, and this is to the actor's credit too, of like really developing what that relationship is in a very short scene, and you kind of get it. And it's that way, and again, in a lot of his movies, he's able to really engage the audience and tell them a story between these two people in a very short amount of time.
Yep. there's like, yeah, so it's basically just kind of like scene after scene of kind of like this, like these like brief downloads of information, kind of built around these larger set pieces. That's sort of like the structure of the movie. It's kind of a long movie though. It ends up being like it's almost 2.5 hours long, and like by the end, like you really kind of feel like you've been through it with these with these characters, because there's so much kind of like little all these like background details that you pick up on over the course of the movie, and that's like the kind of the mark of a good filmmaker, that like you just kind of almost subconsciously like pick up on those little character touches.
Another scene that I like, and I know you were kind of getting into this with your scene of her discovering the signal, but at the I liked when she's at the Arecibo observatory in Puerto Rico, and which is actually it's a real place if you didn't know. And unfortunately, I literally just saw an article the other day on the New York Times where it had been destroyed. Partially destroyed a few years back with some damage. I don't know if it was hurricane related or not, but they've pretty much officially decided that they're not going to repair. It's beyond repair at this point, but they're looking at other ways to restructure the place for educational reasons, and obviously a lot of funding has to go to it. But it's sad. It's sad for scientists. It's sad for the people that have worked at this observatory. It was one of the largest, I think, until. I think there's one in China that's actually bigger now, but it's kind of this landmark thing that's kind of been there for a long time, and it's an incredible thing. People used it for the search for extraterrestrial intelligence through radio signals and planetary radar and all sorts of things. So it's kind of a sad thing.
Yeah, we included the story of the Arecibo telescope being damaged in a Watches and Gear column back when it happened, and I remember reading about it then, and just being like genuinely sad that it that it was going to be that it had fallen into disrepair. It's kind of an impressive tool when you think about like how deep into the universe like that thing can was able to reach, and how like it's just kind of mind blowing that with like relatively elementary technology, like scientists who are like so much smarter than us were able to learn so much about the universe through a radio telescope like that. It's really fascinating.
Yeah, I find it completely fascinating, and obviously now they're able to build things that are a lot smaller on scale, and are able to do a lot more, because like you said, it was sort of an elementary thing, but it was huge, and it's just sort of an icon. And I'm half Puerto Rican. A lot of my family is still in Puerto Rico. It was a really good tourist grab for people to come to the island, and unfortunately, if it kind of just dissipates, then that's gonna hurt the people of the island. But I don't know, maybe they'll do something with the facility that's there on site, at least. And
hopefully they're able to mark it as a historic place. I mean, it's featured
super cool.
Yeah, and like in addition to the like the real science that happened there, I believe it was the telescope was featured in other movies besides Contact.
GoldenEye, or
I think,
was it GoldenEye?
I think there's a Bond movie where it comes up from that Pierce Brosnan era. So it's like it's a legit like piece of pop culture too. And a lot of people kind of like come to science sometimes through those like pop culture, like through that pop culture iconography, which I think is in the end of the day a good thing. So
absolutely. But let's talk about your favorite scenes from the movie.
So the scene that like still kind of like really like stirs me and is like I find like genuinely exciting is the sequence where she discovers the signal, like where you hear the signal, and Ellie is kind of like racing back to the office in is it New Mexico? Is that where the
I think so, yeah.
So after Ellie and her team are kind of like displaced from Arecibo, lack of funding, they get new funding from a character who we haven't mentioned yet, named S.R. Haddon, who's kind of like a at the time, I guess now you'd compare him to like an Elon Musk or maybe like a Jeff Bezos figure, just kind of like, super wealthy, billionaire, we'll definitely talk more about Haddon. He's a fascinating character, but so he starts funding Jodie Foster's team, Arroway's team, in New Mexico, at another radio telescope location. And the way this scene is set up is, Palmer Joss, the Matthew McConaughey character, is giving a Larry King interview, and he's talking about the disconnect that that Americans feel because of like the advancement of science and technology. They actually are just keeping people further apart. And then you see this image of the Earth from space, and you hear this sound, and then you see Ellie with her headphones on, hearing the sound, and it's this like really like well designed metallic crunching sound.
Mm-hmm.
And you see her eyes like, pop open, and she realizes it's, like something she hasn't heard before, like, scanning scanning these star systems. And she really thinks she has something. And like the way that it's like a chase scene, like the way it's composed, like seeing her go back to the, to the offices to move the,
so frantic.
It's like, it's really, really intense. It's like this little like mini action scene and chase scene, kind of like right in that first act of the movie, that sets up the rest of the movie. And it's thrilling. And when she realizes that it's like a real signal, it's great.
She does such a good job at like just portraying this like excitement. I think of myself and how I would react, and if you were just like, this is the one thing you've been like waiting for in your whole life and career, and it's happening. And the fact that she was even able to get words out, I feel like I would just be like screaming nonsense essentially. And she nearly is at one point. It's just like coming through the radio.
Her team can't keep track of like what she's saying. She's like, she's screaming into into like a walkie-talkie, she's like driving back in her convertible from the radio telescope. And you're right. It's like, it's very hectic and chaotic, and the music is great at that point. And like all the while you're hearing that sound, in the background. And, what it is it's like, it's a series of like pulsations of prime numbers, which is the way that the signal initially, presents itself from this like alien intelligence. And like, that's straight that's a Carl Sagan idea through and through, that this alien intelligence would communicate using a universal language and math, that, a prime number, pulsation signal would be like, recognized as something that didn't occur naturally. And like the realization of that, which happens like relatively quickly. I don't know if they would, I guess, scientists who are looking for that, a Carl Sagan type would maybe identify that. I'm not smart enough to come up with that so fast, but it feels very convincing to me, like that, that could happen. Like it feels very authentic.
Thing, No, for sure. It's an amazing scene, and obviously just kind of sets the movie off at that point in time. One thing with Jodie Foster, I feel like I don't always consider her this like, super dynamic actress with, all these range of emotions, but she does portray the emotions in a different way. It's not through maybe facial expressions, but it's through voice and her mannerisms and all these other things.
Like screaming, like she yells a lot.
Yeah, she does yell.
Yeah,
she yells a lot. And at the end too. And it's just she does a good job at yelling. It's like not annoying, but also like I can hear the excitement coming through. And like I said, it's such an exciting scene, and your anticipation of what's coming through those signals. And the whole team is also. I thought this was funny, and I was going to ask your opinion. Did her team of scientists that are back at the station, did they not seem just like hippies, kind of, with the exception of Kent, which is the blind guy, but they I don't know, it just wasn't my idea of scientists. They all are very like
they seem like grad students who are happy to have like
I guess
a job, to have a to work someplace that's being funded. I imagine you kind of get a little sense of this in the movie as and this is like a very real thing. I think Carl Sagan's even written about it, is like, it's not easy to work in the sciences. Like there's not like an endless supply of money, for these projects. So I think like, you kind of get a sense of like how tenuous it all is. Like, that there's like a bureaucratic kind of like nightmare aspect to like, to this, as Ellie is kind of like looking for funding, from one project to the next. And
they're
like,
kind of scrappy on
they're like
vehicles and where they're staying, and you can just tell,
exactly.
it's not high end anything, it's not high tech.
It's not,
stuff
it's not there's no like glamour to that, like to that work. Like they're doing it, like you imagine, like they're not like getting paid a whole lot, or they're doing it because like they really feel dedicated to like to a cause. They have a calling for it. Because like these are like brilliant people who feel like they they want to like contribute something to the world that's valuable. And like by the end of the movie, I think you could argue that they do. So it's kind of like a victory for science. I've always kind of liked looking at the movie in that way.
Me too.
So we get that big like discovery scene of the signal, and that kind of goes on a while, and you start to like realize that like the signal is more than just like these pulsations, and that there's like layers to like the signal, and it becomes clear that there's like it's actually like schematics for a machine that becomes kind of like the focus of the movie and building it. And another scene that I really love is as they're having trouble figuring out how to like put all the pieces of these like schematics together. Ellie meets this Haddon character played by John Hurt for the first time, even though she's been funded by him for I guess years at this point. And you start to get a sense of him as a character, and he almost kind of comes off as like a villainous figure.
Yeah, he does.
He lives in a plane. Ellie's told that he never lands for anybody, and she's kind of like summoned to his plane, and he's figured out a way to put these schematics together into like a readable into something readable, so that they can like understand what it is that they're looking at. I love this scene because you get this like biographical detail about Ellie, because one of the components of this scene where she gets on the plane is he kind of like has this like video prepared of like her life story, and is kind of like reciting it back to her. And I think that's where you learn that her mother died in childbirth, and and you get a little bit of her like academic background there. And I love that scene. What are your thoughts on Haddon, at least at this stage of the movie? When
you said villainous, and that is exactly kind of what he sort of portrays at first. And he's kind of this weirdo, creepo guy, and very eclectic, and you don't know really what to make of him at first, and you don't really know if he's honestly good or bad, in his intentions with her. Because, like I said, it is a little creepy, and what he's done and prepared, and obviously has been tracking her and watching her and what she's been doing, and but yeah, I mean, it obviously turns out for the good later on in the movie, and he does have somewhat good intentions with this, and more in line with what she wants to, and he does believe in her and her cause, and what she wants with this information in particular.
The thing I love about that, another thing I love about that scene is like it's very weird. Like you definitely have this like sense of like there's this like anxious tone to it when she gets on the plane. Like you just don't really know kind of what's going on, and like every time you see Haddon, like from that point forward, it gets weirder. Like it's like he's always in like a different kind of like strange like scenario. Later on in the movie, he's on the Russian space station and is talking to Ellie through a satellite in a very pivotal scene. So I just think that character is fascinating, and like, really good performance by John Hurt, who's wearing a bald cap, I assume, in the movie, and just like kind of looks like a Bond villain, but really reminds me of like an Elon Musk sort of.
No, you hit the nail on the head there with the Elon Musk thing. I think it certainly is that sort of character that we have today. As a multi-billionaire with lots of money, and is interested in science and taking us further with it, and not listening to the government. So yeah.
so there are two other scenes that I think we really need to talk about, and those are the two scenes that center around this machine actually being put to use. And one of them is the initial test of the machine. And again, big spoiler warning, like it does not go well. There's what is essentially a terrorist attack by the Jake Busey character. It's the first time we've mentioned his name. This might be I think was probably my first exposure to Jake Busey. The fascinating character actor, fascinating screen presence. He's the leader of a fringe religious group, and he it basically sets off a suicide bomb. While the machine is being tested, kills a number of people involved in the test, including Tom Skerritt, who plays David Drumlin. Jodie Foster's essentially her boss. At this point in the movie, science advisor to the president, who's kind of like cast as like a skeptic about all of this until he has the opportunity to benefit from it. He's going to be the one who's like
take
sent
the credit.
Yeah, exactly. So he had kind of become like the winner of this sweepstakes, essentially this competition to go to be like the person who gets sent to wherever this machine is going to take somebody.
Yeah.
So there's that scene with the with the machine, and then the second time you see a machine is after Haddon tells us and tells Arroway that there's a second machine that's been built in secret, and that she actually gets to go, and that kind of like sets off the big finale of the movie. I wanted to ask you, Kat, what you thought of the production design around this machine. Like, to me, it's still, watching the movie back recently, it's still one of the most impressive kind of like set pieces, and just like it's really. I just found it to be really well executed, and it seems like, again, like something that like authentically like
could exist.
Yeah, like it all just seems like really within the realm of possibility, in a way, which is so uncommon for a lot of science fiction movies. Anytime you see the machine, I love it.
Yeah, we watch a ton of sci-fi movies, and sometimes there's just like this extravagant ship or something or another that just seems so unrealistic to our imagination minds. But like you mentioned, seems very real. I thought, the CGI and all the effects were great, and this movie just holds up extremely well to me. There's nothing that except for the end scene when she is kind of at this beach that we'll talk about, but that, and it was meant to feel more dreamlike and not real in that aspect. But everything else seemed very realistic. I love this machine, and like you, I think I would be so interested now to read the book and actually see how it compares, and how they would describe this machine. But it looks legit.
Yeah. It's just great production design. Like it's so well conceived. It's this like sphere made up of these circular rings that all kind of like rotate around each other. And in the sequence towards the end of the movie where the machine is not destroyed before it gets to like, full velocity or whatever, it creates this like gravitational, effect, I guess, like, right at the center of it that sends Ellie through a wormhole.
Yeah.
To Vega and then beyond. And then she has this kind of like rendezvous with an alien in the form of her dad, who's downloaded her thoughts and her memories to appear more palatable to her, to not freak her out,
which is so nice of them, really.
Yeah, it's a kindness that they that they offer you. Yeah,
they're so really nice.
Yeah,
they're
really
so
great.
nice.
So this was kind of I remember at the time, the movie came out, there was like discussion around it, and like this was like kind of like a controversial ending. Like I think people really wanted to see aliens, and for it to be kind of like a dad-daughter, ending, and like, focusing on that seemed like kind of like almost anticlimactic to some at the time. I've always loved it. I've always thought it was really affecting and emotional, and like in just the right ways. Well, what do you think of the ending? And were you at any point kind of like let down? Did you want to see like an alien? Did you want more answers? Because it's definitely left
Yeah.
very like open ended. You don't get a
Yeah,
lot of solid answers.
I can certainly see how people felt like that. I've never really thought about it in that way, only because I was really satisfied
Yeah,
with how she, interacted with them, and that they were so thoughtful, and that they didn't want to essentially scare or freak her out. And she's already had this like extremely weird thing of going through the wormhole and all this. Like she's already kind of been through the paces. Why freak her out at this point if we don't have to? And they obviously had the technology and uh, know how to do that. So, and I again, with me loving the father daughter aspect of this movie, I did kind of like that they were reunited in some way. She got to see him, and he touches her cheek, and I think he gives her a kiss on the forehead and all of that. And even though it's not really her dad, she does get some little bit of closure there.
yeah,
With that, and the alien, I guess, says to her at one point, small moves, Ellie, and that's something her dad had mentioned to her
hmm
on the beginning of the movie. And so it's just like it feels very much like him. And again, I think she's able to get some maybe tiny bit of not really closure with her dad, but just another moment there with him that's special, and she'll obviously never forget it.
yeah. Yeah, I've come to really like that scene. I also find it really satisfying, like I said, and it also feels like it feels right in line with the rest of the movie. Like
Hmm.
these characters are constantly kind of like searching for answers, and every time they get an answer, it just creates more questions. And so like
Yeah.
why would the end of the movie be any different? Like
Yeah.
and I love the idea too, that she's talking to her dad slash the alien, and like at one point he says to her that they didn't build the wormhole, like the tunnels, like
Hmm.
they were there when they got there, and it implies like this enormity to the
Yeah.
like to the universe that is just kind of like as a 13-year-old or 14-year-old, like seeing this movie, it's just like really like mind blowing,
Yeah.
and it's just I still love it, and it still is kind of like awe inspiring to me, and I think
Yeah.
it really works very well.
Well, and I think that's Sagan's whole thing is like there's this infinite level of possibilities out there, and if they would have showed an alien, our minds would have only thought about that alien, that being the only thing really out there. So, and the fact that they didn't show us anything that we don't already know or have seen, they left a lot to the imagination, which was the whole point.
hmm
Because there is so much out there in this movie, and they didn't even know where, like you said, the machine came from, and and he kind of let her know that there are no answers, like there aren't. It's an infinite search.
Yep.
But it encouraged her to always to continue, and obviously she comes back from that experience, and it's kind of known that and I can't remember the time frame that they said she was in there was like a few minutes, right?
So the
She was only
she has this experience on the beach with her with her dad, and then like the next thing you see is she's waking up in the pod, and she's told by like the crew, kind of like running things like offshore, that like she just dropped right through and she didn't go anywhere, but she
there's a
experienced,
malfunction.
yeah, like she
Yeah,
experienced this like this trip to to this other star system through this wormhole, and it took like several hours, I think, like
it's like 14 hours or
something
something
like
like that.
that,
Yeah.
yeah. And that kind of sets up the final sequence in the movie. It kind of becomes like a courtroom drama for a couple minutes.
Yeah.
And there's this tension between Ellie and the James Woods character, who I don't think we've talked about
No,
yet.
there's so many characters.
Yeah, and I want to ask you, before we end, like what your favorite supporting performances, because there's like really
Yeah.
just like a amazing cast of supporting
Yeah.
actors in this movie. But so the James Woods character is really this like an antagonistic figure. He's the national security advisor, and he takes on this role towards the end of kind of like trying to poke holes in Ellie's story. And you get this scene, which is basically a hearing where they're trying to figure out what actually happened to Ellie, when this, when the machine like did it or did it not take her to Vega. And that's when you kind of like get this like the climax of this like religion versus science, debate, as Ellie has to kind of admit that she just has to, just to have like a little faith that like it actually happened, and like she can't prove it, which is kind of what she's always like staked her whole career on, is like the provable, in the scientific, nature of everything.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a great scene. I agree. I definitely felt the courtroom drama there at the end. It was a quick shift from what we were just coming from.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a great story. And yeah, I was just thinking, we were talking about characters. I think James Wood, I think he does a great job in this movie, and he's kind of in a role that he's always, to me, kind of meant to play, which is just like this kind of asshole character.
Yeah.
He's so good at playing that role, and it fits in perfectly, and he's honestly the perfect person to play it.
Yeah. He's sort of become like a version of that character in real life. He's like, I think he's like been like famously banned by like certain social media platforms for
my gosh.
Yeah, he has very strong very strong political opinions. And is kind of has become kind of an internet troll in his later years, which is one of the reasons he hasn't really been working too much over the last like decade or so. So yeah, he really grew into that part, I think you could say.
What about you as far as the character actors in the movie and supporting performances? Who was your favorite?
So I mean, I think probably the answer is James Woods. Like he's like that, like that's an incredible like supporting. He has,
you don't like him, but you kind of need him in the movie.
He gets like a really great kind of like moment at the end where he's interrogating Ellie. It's like a really great like big speech moment.
Very impressively.
Yeah. I really like Tom Skerritt in this movie as Drumlin. He's I don't know, like for me, Tom Skerritt is like he's iconic to these like to two movies. Like, there's this performance and his role in Alien, where he's like famously grotesquely killed by an alien. And so whenever I watch this movie, I always think like, you shouldn't be so skeptical, Drumlin. Like you were killed by one of these things, and in a previous in a Ridley Scott movie, like not too long ago. So I always find that kind of amusing. But Angela Bassett is in this movie.
Yeah,
Rob Lowe is in this movie. As you mentioned,
there's a lot of big stars that just kind of pop out. Especially Rob Lowe, I felt really just kind of came out of nowhere and was in the movie, I don't know, 5 minutes or so. He didn't really have much of a role, but kudos to Robert Zemeckis for this cast, and they all play a part. And I really liked Angela Bassett a lot and her role in this movie.
So the other thing I wanted to ask you, like, this is we're going to circle back to watches here for a second, because like this is a watch podcast. So I wanted to ask you, why do you think this movie? Is there anything about this movie that's appealing to you, like as a watch enthusiast? Because there are a couple things I picked up on in my most recent viewing of this movie that kind of like clicked in and felt like parallels to like how I think about like the watch world in a way. And I wanted to see if you had any thoughts on that at all.
Yeah, that's a really great question. I hadn't really thought too much about, other than there weren't a whole lot of watches in this movie. There's not a lot of watch spotting. I think at one point I noticed on Kent's character, who's played by William Fichtner. He's wearing like a Casio, looks like, of sorts, like a calculator type watch, and he's a blind character. Another great character in this movie. And interesting that I was reading kind of behind the scenes that his name was Kent Clark, kind of a version of Clark Kent, and he was blind. He had this kind of like extra hearing because he was blind. I thought that was kind of a nice little play there. But I don't know. There's a lot of sort of technical things that are going on in this movie that I could kind of see how it would relate into like horology at some point and building and mechanics that I think draws a lot of people to watches.
Yeah.
If you were drawn to that aspect of this movie. But I don't know. I'm interested to hear your take.
So I kind of landed on on that same idea that there's like a fastidiousness to like these scientist characters that like I feel like is like definitely part of the watch community, like on a lot of levels.
It's
like
all
a
in
lot
the
of
details, right?
Yeah, like a lot of these scientists like could be watchmakers if they had like, been exposed to like something else and in their childhood or something that like led them to like, mechanics instead of astrophysics. Like, who knows? Another thing, kind of like a more like theoretical, like I guess, or philosophical idea that that I had around this is just like that when Palmer Joss he's in that Larry King interview, when you get the signal, the signal's first appearance, he's talking about whether science and technology make us happier. I feel like that is that's a conversation that like a version of that happens in the watch community too. Like so many people, I think, gravitate towards mechanical watches because it like connects them to something that's like, quote unquote, like more pure, like in a way. And so I wondered, like, to myself, if like maybe that's why like this movie like still resonates, for me through like, when I first saw this movie, like I didn't care about watches, in the same way that I do now. And like I think that there's I don't know, like I see a parallel.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I can totally see that. And that's a great observation to make. And I think there's all sorts of like weird parallels in the movie now that I'm thinking about it, with the whole aspect of time and we're reminded that there's, she loses her dad and all these things that kind of like remind us that, time is not infinite and, and then what she goes through and the fact that they were, basically calling her a liar. You didn't spend that much time in this wormhole. You went right through and just time keeps kind of coming up over and over again. And so that even though this movie isn't about watches or, has anything to do with them, time is such a big aspect of it.
Yeah.
And that's something that we think about all the time.
Yeah. Yeah.
No pun intended.
Well said. Until the pun. The pun, yeah. So I think that's just about it. I think we've kind of gone through the movie, and I think we've dove pretty deep into it. I just wanted to like highlight a couple of movies that might be good, like as like further viewing if you like Contact, or if you see Contact and want like something else that's like sort of a similar flavor. Obviously Cosmos, the Carl Sagan documentary, is really great and worth watching. And Neil deGrasse Tyson actually did a version of Cosmos a few years ago, which I think you can find on YouTube or on demand somewhere, which is also pretty good. But the original is great, and then you get to like actually see Carl Sagan, kind of like talking about the universe, and it's really wonderful. Cool. So definitely check that out. Another movie that I think a lot of listeners have probably seen is Interstellar. Interstellar is also kind of deals with a wormhole, factors heavily into the plot of Interstellar. And Kip Thorne, who's a theoretical physicist who kind of like is sort of like an expert on like the idea of wormholes, consulted on Interstellar as well as this movie. So if they've
another
seen,
great father-daughter movie too.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, every Christopher Nolan movie is a parent-child movie of some kind. If you really like, get down into it, that's like a big theme for him too. So I think most people have seen Interstellar, but like it might be worth a rewatch or a good double feature with this movie, kind of understanding that like the wormhole aspect of it is kind of like comes from the mind of the same person. Like he consulted on both of them. And another film that I really love, that maybe we do on this podcast at some point, because it's just really great, is Arrival by Denis Villeneuve, which is another like First Contact movie. Kind of a similar idea to Contact, and it's really great. It's also like a very grounded, approachable movie in terms of its science. It tells a really great story, and is sort of like a just like a flip side to the Contact coin. I think I highly recommend that one.
I thought of a movie too to add to this list.
Yeah.
It really seems so far away from this list of movies and Contact, but it has to do with kind of radio frequencies and sort of time travel, and that is the movie Frequency.
Oh
with,
yeah, Frequency is really good.
And another parent-child type movie, and it's sort of related to like the aurora borealis happening, and radio frequencies being able to transmit through time, and pretty interesting movie too.
Yeah, no, Frequency is a good good call. I'd also add just like other Robert Zemeckis movies. Like he kind of returns to these themes, over and over again. I was kind of just thinking about there's a father-son thing happening in Flight, which is a very different approach, compared to what we see with the father-daughter stuff and Contact. But like he really does return to that stuff over and over again. And interesting filmmaker. Like he's made a lot of really interesting films. So
I was looking back at the list and saw that What Lies Beneath movie, and I love that movie, and I had no idea that he directed it. Wow, that's kind of a one-off for him.
What Lies Beneath, that's the movie he made. So he directed Castaway with Tom Hanks, frequent collaborator Tom Hanks, and he shot What Lies Beneath in between shooting like the two halves of Castaway, because Tom Hanks famously had to either lost a bunch of weight or gained weight, to play that character, being like emaciated after being stranded on an island. So he did What Lies Beneath was like the middle of the sandwich, the middle of that Castaway sandwich. So.
I really enjoy that movie. If you haven't seen it, Harrison Ford, Michelle Pfeiffer, it's a good thriller.
Yeah, kind of an overlooked like supernatural thriller from that era when they used to make movies like that more often, and they really don't anymore. So so that's Contact. Thank you, Kat, for joining me on Time on Screen, and thank you for listening. We'll do more of these in the future. If you have suggestions for future entries into the Time on Screen catalog, please feel free to drop them in the comments or send me a message and let me know. And thank you for listening, Kat. Thank you for coming on.
Thanks for having me. Talk later. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.